things.
Okay,
that
we're
I've been-
going to call the Tuesday, May 11th work session to order. Not going to get in, we're going to talk, we got some things to talk about the flood, so I'm not going to get into all the things that have gone on for the last 2 weeks. We could talk for the next 4 hours about that, or the next 2 weeks, but the only thing I will say, and then I'll be quiet, is Eric continually talks about and I agree, about the efforts of the staff and the department heads and the hours and hours that they spent, but no one has said the things that need to be said about Eric. So he won't like this, but I know Eric and I on Saturday and Sunday were on continuous conversation, and in fact, on Friday afternoon, about 5 o'clock, I said, "What, you got much on your schedule this week?" He said, "No." He said, "As a matter of fact, it's like the first weekend. I don't have a whole lot to do. We've got a few projects around the house we're going to do, and then all heck broke loose." So
that all changed on Saturday.
So Eric performed admirably, as we all knew that he would, and thank you for your effort.
Thank you.
We'll have to check with Davis Nolan next time.
All right, item number 2 are citizens' comments, and if you come here to address this body on something that's on the agenda, please wait till that happens. If you have something else to say, we'll be glad to listen. If not, we're going to move right on to item 3. Eric, why don't you start and kind of give us an update of what we're doing.
Yeah, I do have a brief presentation I wanted to just walk through. No PowerPoint slides, I apologize. You know.
That's good.
But I'm just going to go through some key, yeah, you're welcome, some key components of the event itself and the response by the city, just because I think we need to say it publicly, just sort of the magnitude of what we have dealt with in the last 10 days, and just to give some context to what the city organization has been doing. And I thank you, Mayor, and everyone for the kind words about me, but the group behind me and everybody out on the streets have done all of it.
And I think they
just want to
deserve
thank
it.
that.
I want to say one thing before you continue, because I've had a lot of comments, and we aren't going to discuss all of this because, as the mayor said, we'd be here all night. But I do have a message from a lot of our constituents all over town, and Alderman Moore and Alderman Skinner and myself and Ann came for a while, and we went out on Friday. But I wanted to say the comments from the citizens have been nothing but glowing reports about what the city has done and how they've reacted, and the staff and the people, solid waste to streets to planning to codes, everything. And I just wanted to say the people really praise the city workers, and you, Eric, and I just want you to know that I did not hear one negative comment.
Well, thank you. That's what we're here for, and people stepped up without a doubt, and we're proud of that response. The event itself exceeded a 1,000-year storm. When you look at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration chart, it says the bottom line is a 1,000-year storm in a 48-hour period. That's about, I think, 13.53 inches of rain is their measurement. At our wastewater plant, we measured 14.85 inches. So that just gives you a sense that we didn't just pass it by a little bit, we passed it by a lot. So it was truly a historic storm. The Harpeth River reached a crest at Sunday morning at 9:15 at about 35.14 feet. And we exceeded the 100-year flood really throughout the community when you look at those measures. So that initial response was clearly responding to the event. We dealt with over 1,900 non-emergency calls at our communications center and nearly 200 911 calls within that Saturday, Sunday timeframe, and responded to those. We incurred last week, I don't have the numbers that include over the weekend and up through today, about 2,700 hours of overtime in responding to those needs. The largest area in that initial storm response was in our fire department, where we had 1,285 hours of overtime. We had a lot of folks come in and work a 48-hour shift and start a 24-hour shift early and just stick at it. And and just be there. So that's kind of that total. The big other overtime hours we know we'll see from the weekend and into this week has been what we've done in solid waste collections, and that's our solid waste crew, but we've also borrowed equipment and people from streets, from parks, and from water to help with that as well. So that's truly been a team effort in sharing resources, both people and equipment. We had 2 pieces of equipment, knuckle booms come from Knoxville to help with the effort, and our folks had jumped in and used that equipment. We had Sevierville provided a dump truck and an operator. Pete Glenn came from Sevierville and helped us out for a few days, and we appreciate what he did. And so all of that came together to help us just be really ongoing throughout the weekend in terms of hitting neighborhoods and trying to get debris up as quickly as we possibly could. And so my overtime hours don't reflect that at this point. We'll have that for you, later this week as we gather that. And we're tracking this information on a daily basis in terms of hours incurred and what we're doing, because we want to know, but also it plays into the FEMA reimbursement and the reporting that we'll do down the line as this process continues. In terms of city costs, direct costs incurred in responding in that initial week, about just under $11,000 of response costs, direct costs in terms of equipment we had to purchase on the fly. Probably the most interesting of which was the boats that Rocky and the fire crew went down to Academy Sports and bought them out. Just said, we'll take every boat you got. And they sure did come in handy. That was just under $3,400 worth of expense there. But those are the direct efforts involved in that. When we assess the damage to city property, the numbers that we have at this point are just under $175,000. The largest impact of which by far is in the parks area, which we, rough estimates, working numbers at this point are at about $133,500, and that's largely at Fieldstone Park and at Pinkerton probably being the next one with the most impact there. But those are our big numbers there, and that's what's driven that. Again, we continue to assess, but we think that's a pretty good number in terms of city facilities. A lot of work in the initial storm response with street closures. We closed about 38 streets at one time or another, everything from a 4-hour duration up to a 68-hour duration. And that was just a ton of work, and just being there and observing and trying to be safe in communication between police, fire, and streets. And our streets crew just did yeoman's work in getting out there and monitoring that and making sure that we were controlling those intersections as best we could to keep people safe. Equipment usage, just a little bit of that. We talked about that actually already in terms of our costs incurred in that and the hours used in that area. Again, over 2,700 hours there that helped respond to that. When you look at fire calls, we had rescues, numerous. I can't give you a total number on each rescue, but we had an estimated number of 398 people that we performed some sort of water rescue with, and a number of rescues that took place in a mutual aid effort as well in Brentwood and into the county. But the single largest was approximately 200 folks that we were moved out and got into dry ground into safety out of Fieldstone Farms. The next one would be River Landing, about 63 folks that were moved there, and in Ewingville Drive, about 43. So those are probably the largest ones, but again, a total of just under 398 citizens that we moved or rescued in one way or another in terms of our response there. We've moved into the cleanup and recovery stage, and the big focus there is our areas of solid waste collection. I haven't talked to Becky this afternoon, but our numbers are up. We were at 723 tons yesterday, and today, she gives you my daily total. Where are we?
100.99 plus what you had yesterday.
We had 100, just about 101, so we're at 824 tons of flood debris, and from Monday of last week through today. So that's a pretty incredible response and amount of effort that went in there. The damage assessment process has continued with our teams of building inspectors going out. We've looked at approximately 700, I don't have my sheet with me, sorry about that, 700 plus structures the total amount of damage that we assess is just about $14.5 million worth of damage. So, that's our rough estimate based on amount of water, and using a chart that FEMA uses that sort of assigns percentages based on the amount of water that you can show impacting structures. So it's an admittedly rough number, but that's the number that we have. Approximately of those damaged structures, we got about 350 total, approximately 300 in the residential category, and that's about 2% of our detached single-family inventory impacted by floodwaters.
You're talking 350.
350 total that we assess damage
Total home.
on. We've looked at over
Homes.
700. 350 structures impacted,
Okay.
300 of which are single-family, about 50 of which are non-residential. So that gives you just sort of a context, and that's an ongoing number as well. We continue to respond to those and work with that. We have, again, asked folks to, and you will look at tonight, official action that makes the building permits free of charge, so that we are making that as easy as possible for flood-related repair, and we want to formalize that with you tonight. But we are encouraging folks to call us if they have any damage so that we can do the assessment and also provide them with any needed permits related to the impact on their structure. And again, ask them to call our Building and Neighborhood Services, which is 794-7012, to get that assistance. Water restrictions have been a big part of the story, and are fortunately now those requirements are lessening in terms of what we've heard. I got a letter today from TDEC noting that they are lifting the restrictions for our area at this point, and that's good news. We had actually been a day in front of TDEC in terms of declaring our emergency last Monday, and we'll ask you to take action on that tonight also. But water staff was diligent in watching that. A lot of late night calls, early morning calls, tracking where we were, and Mark and his staff were just, like I said, diligent in working with that, and we had limited access at our wastewater plant, and so we really had folks working together as a team to manage that and manage the time that we needed to have them there and to keep a good eye on things. Our wastewater flow is in the 12 to 13 million gallon range now. It was at a high of somewhere around 35 million per day.
Wow.
At one point, with all the water flowing through the system, and the system held and did what it needed to do. And so we're glad of that and proud of the work that it took to keep that on track and to watch that. But our water tanks are full and where they need to be. We're operating and treating at over 2 million gallons a day from our plant, and able to receive what we need from Harpeth Valley, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of over 4 million gallons a day from them, based on a typical day usage. So that's sort of a summary of the activity and where we are. What we want to bring to you tonight are 4 items for action, and these would be items we'd ask you to add to your agenda at the voting meeting at 7 o'clock, and you should have a packet of those with you tonight.
Eric, can I go
Yes.
back one moment? I may have missed it. How many of those homes are displaced families? There are all
That are
300
actually absolutely out of their family,
Yeah,
out of their home.
that do not have a place to live. In other words, are homeless and having to go somewhere.
That are displaced. I
Do we have that
couldn't
number?
tell you on that. I don't know if Gary could tell me or not.
Did we
you have any
dissect
sense
it
of
down
that?
that low?
least 200.
See, that's an important number to know
Yeah,
for this community. It's how many of those homes are not livable. I mean, they're actually having to go somewhere else.
And repair before they move back.
Right.
Need to repair so that before they go back in. That's,
About 200,000.
that's our best guess
I
estimate.
know.
And Gary's been out there with his crew, so he's probably the best guy to hang a number on that. But it's always hard to tell because you don't know who's staying with family and friends and where they are exactly, and who's able to stay where they are. But that's probably as good an estimate as any.
Ken made a comment, he said,
I said that I didn't see any that anybody could live in.
Okay.
Yeah, when you saw
I
the,
mean, just,
Yeah.
everything was gutted all the way back to the sticks. Sheet rock was gone, the floors looked like the waves at the ocean. They're about 3 or 4 feet high, just floors buckled
Yeah.
like this.
and the one about
A lot of families pitching in.
And it's happening.
oh, yeah.
There's many homes that cannot be lived in for repair.
incredible, the waves of effort that went in to clear some of those areas out, and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that stepped up to help that happen.
Eric,
Yes, sir.
how do we treat 35 million gallons?
That's a good question.
Mark, we just do.
We run out of motor.
Yeah. Mark, you want to
That is
try to address that?
We don't, do we?
Rapid.
Open the gate.
As fast as we can. Let Mark answer it better.
A little bleach.
A
lot of Clorox.
Eventually, we'll get to that question.
Right, our permit's based on 12 MGD. That's our treatment capacity
And we
in
normally treat
district.
5 or 6.
Right, and during storm events, we get a volume of infiltration and inflow to the collection system, which, we still need to maintain the hydraulic flow through the plant. So hydraulically, that plant was designed for something in excess of 12 MGD with the understanding that, you're going to get infiltration and inflow into the system. And gravity systems across the country, across the world, all experience some form of I&I, which in the design process, you plan for that. So hydraulically, you can pass through that. And what you're looking for is clarification, filtration, and then ultraviolet treatment, which we were able to maintain. You don't have the same amount of retention time in your basins for biological treatment, of course, because you're pushing so much more flow through. But fortunately, we were able to keep the plant solids and everything intact and going through even at that rate. So it was a testament to the operators that were out there. They did a fantastic job, so very pleased with them.
One other comment, I just want to say to Alderman Peterson, who has been the historian of floods. We all now are graduate of the flood program of Franklin.
Well, I will have to say that last night I saw the family that was my next door neighbors for 15 years. And, just
Devastated.
just really, really sad.
Okay.
What other questions can we answer for you? There are 4 items we'd like you to take action on tonight and add to your voting meeting. The first of which provides for the authorization for the free building permits for structures damaged by the flood. And I'll just run through the description of each of these, and we're glad to talk about whatever you'd like related to that. The second resolution essentially terminates the declaration of water shortage emergency, status 2, is what was put in place through the mayor's action. And this would terminate that. This is consistent with what TDEC has given us today, and we've included the communication I received this afternoon from TDEC related to their emergency order. So this would rescind that and terminate the emergency. The third item is essentially a broader discretionary grant of authority for me to work with citizens impacted, especially utility customers impacted by the flood. Our normal leak adjustment process may not be enough to work with folks, and I'm just asking for some latitude to work with that. We're still kind of assessing what comes in, what we're dealing with in terms of shutoffs, disconnects, late payment issues, leak adjustments, all of those sort of issues, and I'd just like some latitude to work with folks on that, and we can track and document what we do related to that for you. And then the final item is really adopting a plan of action. Our staff has been working diligently with TDOT and Federal Highway, and specifically I want to recognize David Parker and Eric Gardner for their work on this, and Mayor Schroer working with TDOT Commissioner nicely on this issue as well to really push this and try to get some authorization to move the process as quickly as we can. This would help endorse that plan of action, which essentially allows us to, the biggest part is allow us to bypass the residency requirement, that they're living in the structure when we buy it. That's a standard requirement of the Uniform Act, which guides this property acquisition. This would allow us to get those folks into temporary housing now, cover that cost as part of this whole process, and allow this acquisition process to move forward more quickly and I think more humanely for the folks impacted. And we're talking about 10 structures. There are 11 that are involved in the total take, but we've already purchased one previously a couple years ago, and this deals with those 10 remaining homes that are full takes for the Mac Hatcher extension project. So those are the 4 actions we'd like you to add tonight to the voting meeting, and that I think those would help put us in a good position to take action on an ongoing, timely basis related to these issues and the fallout from the flood.
Mayor,
Yeah.
related to number 4, those are all homes in Rebel Meadows, correct?
Yes.
A couple questions. I want to be clear. One, really what we're doing is accelerating the offer. We're not condemning. We're not taking. We're moving the offer making up on the timeline.
Yeah, we've got to still comply with the Uniform Act fully. This allows us to get folks out of their home more quickly into temporary residence.
If they say yes.
I want to point out, though, the acceleration is only through staff efforts of the city and TDOT. It is not a waiver of any conditions or anything like that. So we are accelerating, but it's not some formal acceleration.
Okay.
It's through the efforts.
The question is really, it remains up to the homeowner to say yes or no. We're simply moving the offer up in time.
Yes.
So that they can presumably decide whether or not.
It will still be the same process, and we will not go to condemnation unless there's just a breakdown of negotiation.
If someone elects to repair and remain, that's their choice.
Yes.
Now, eventually, perhaps there will be condemnation, but for the time being, what we're doing is we're getting staff to accelerate the offer making so that anyone that might rather go ahead and sell can. Second, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Second, we are offering, I assume that what we are doing is offering them what would have been a fair price the day before the flood.
We are doing the appraisals based on pre-flood, yes.
All right, so we are ignoring the fact that the homes are severely damaged or maybe even damaged beyond repair.
Correct.
And we're making them...
As far as the appraised value,
Okay.
fee simple value, yes.
And if we have one, some, or even all of the people say yes, and we end up owning them, what is our plan?
Our plan is to, as soon as we gain control, that we're going to try to have demolition started. We've actually already had people calling us wanting to bid on the process. This is something that TDOT's also indicated to us as soon as we can to get contracts.
All right, so we would, I guess, given the condition of the homes now, we probably scraped a lot.
Well, actually, one person that called said that they're considering bidding to move some of them, or if not all of them.
All right, well, whatever they want to do. The point is that it would be...
We will bid it out.
It would be our intent to wind up with a vacant lot.
Yes.
And I guess then we will seed it and maintain it as just an empty lot.
Yes.
So there won't be any attractive nuisances or problems for the neighbors to deal with.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I do want to say that I really appreciate the work that the mayor and the staff did on this, because it was obviously the right thing to do, but still being able to get through the red tape is really was really a good step.
Through the red tape.
Yes, we have, and I do want, you hear me,
As much as we can.
You hear me talk about TDOT a lot. TDOT staff, right-of-way staff, and the administration was very helpful in this process. They actually drafted the letter for us, but they pushed it. They came down and met with us Monday. We got it worked out. They had already talked to Federal Highway. We had it signed within an hour after the certified.
And I would like to really commend Commissioner Nicely. We sat down in his office, explained what was going on, and he said, we need to do what's right, regardless of exactly what the rules are, and and he passed that along real quickly to his staff, and they jumped too. So wasn't any convincing on him. He heard the story and knew exactly what needed to be done. So appreciate them meeting with us when they did, and to think that since Thursday at 9 o'clock, we've got, we'll be the last one, but we've got TDOT, Federal Highway Administration, and the City of Franklin signing off on something this quickly, and Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday is like, we won't ever expect that to happen again, that's for sure, though. Anyway, so they're very good and very conscientious about that.
We do have a neighborhood meeting for Rebel Meadows scheduled tomorrow evening in this room, 5:30. We did also, we're able to give them some special attention last night at the community meeting. David met with a good number of them to do some question and answer at the end of that meeting. But we know that's a unique circumstance. We're trying to make sure staff has been, what Ben Worley and Eric have talked individually to most of these property owners to try to make sure they understand what's going on, but we'll have the neighborhood meeting tomorrow night as well. So our folks have been diligent in trying to get the word out to them. And we'll continue to.
And we do need to recognize Ben. He's actually working today. We have one temporary housing already set up for one of the residents. We just got a little paperwork we got to take care of, and we'll have that handled. But Ben has been really working hard, been out there every day talking to these people. So he went with the resident to the apartment complex that they're looking at renting from and talked to them himself also. So
Good.
He's really worked hard.
A lot of individual care to try to help this along. Yeah. So. The other thing I didn't mention, I should have mentioned, is the Disaster Recovery Center. We've now opened at the Church Street end of City Hall. That's open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 days a week at this point, and that's your one stop for dealing with FEMA, SBA, Tennessee Emergency Management is there as well. So it's a good place for folks to get face-to-face help from the federal officials that are here on the relief side. So we were really pleased to be able to get it right here at City Hall. I think that's going to be really convenient for our citizens and for folks in the broader community as well to get here and get help. So that's a resource we have right here at City Hall as well.
And I guess we could also echo what they said last night. The first thing, though, is to
Register.
register.
Get registered.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Either through www.disasteраssistance.gov or the FEMA number, which is 1-800-621-FEMA, or just show up down here if you really are having trouble with it. They can help you do that here as well. So.
And so tonight, what we'll have to do is we'll have to amend the agenda to add this, so we'll need a motion to do that. We'll do that probably right after consent. We'll add it to the back of the new business items, and then we'll do those each individually. So, okay. Item number 4, consideration of resolution 2010-29, a resolution declaring the intent of the City of Franklin to act as government pass-through entity for certain land acquisition projects as requested by the Civil War Preservation Trust.
Yes, Ernie Bacon is here tonight to speak to that issue. The city would like to act as a pass-through for funds, grant funds for the acquisition of some battlefield property. Evidently, this has been done before, and we would simply be the pass-through. Would you like to say something?
No, this pertains to properties at 1219 Columbia Avenue and at 111 Claiborne Street. These grants will in effect have the potential of bringing in over $500,000 of grant money into the Franklin community, some of which will have to be matched by private sources. But we do request the city function as a pass-through entity as required by the grant process.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. Item number 5, presentation of our integrated water plant.
I'll just do a brief introduction and get out of the way. Here with us this evening is Zach Daniel and Kirk Westfall from CDM. They've been working with us on the integrated resources planning effort for Water Resources. They're here to, we've been working for the past several months on making some headway in this project as Alderman Moore has participated in a number of the steering committee meetings. We're just here to give you an update, let you know where we are, and answer any questions. If I may, I'm going to give Sarah some the digital information so we can put it up on the screen. There's several handouts for us tonight. So.
Yeah, we're going to try to, as Kirk passes around to each of y'all, we're going to try to keep this pretty quick. We talked with Dr. Moore about doing maybe a 5 to 10 minute update for everyone. A lot of y'all have been at either one of these stakeholder processes or the public workshop to this point. As Mark said, we've been working now for 3 or so months on the process, probably about halfway through this initial phase 1 portion of the program. A couple of these handouts you may have seen previously, the top being sort of the overall flow chart for the project. We get it pulled up here so they can see it on TV as well. To this point, basically, we went through the second set of stakeholder meetings. We've got a stakeholders group of almost 20 people, very active. We actually had a technical workshop today with about 10 of those members as well to go through the actual model itself. But the first workshop meeting was to start defining what the objectives of the process are. What you see on the second sheet that you have is the 9 objectives that were developed as part of the process. These have been both reviewed through the steering committee and then went back to the stakeholders committee to make sure everyone that we addressed the comments that everyone had. At the second meeting, we then went through these objectives. I won't go through each one of them. As we get to the end, if we have any questions about anything specific, please feel free to ask. We took these 9 objectives, and in order to utilize these to differentiate between different alternatives, different options, and groups of options to make these alternatives, we developed performance measures that measure each of these specific goals. And there's multiple performance measures on each specific options you see on the third sheet in your handout, anywhere from 5 to 6 on some to fewer on others. But basically, these are both quantitative and qualitative measures that will allow us to be able to dial in to specific options. We term options as single project type ideas, and alternatives as groups of options or projects put together that maybe meet specific objectives. What we're in the process of doing right now is going through specific projects with the stakeholder and steering groups currently. That is sort of a list we developed that we'll share with y'all as we go through that process, but a list that was developed where nothing was really off the table. We'll take each of those projects and then group them together into alternatives to meet each one of those objectives, and there'll be objective-specific alternatives. What we'll see is which alternatives seem to meet the objectives the best, and then we'll start taking different projects from each of those alternative groups, mirroring them together to form ones that maybe best meet those 9 objectives as a whole. I don't do having specific.
I think the only thing that I would add would be that we've been focusing with the stakeholders up until this point on what are the issues and problems that we want to try to address in this integrated plan. The tendency often in a plan like this is to jump right into solutions and trying to solve the problems without fully defining the problems. So the 2 workshops that we've had to date so far, and a lot of work has gone into defining the problems by virtue of these objectives. These objectives are the 9 issues that this group of stakeholders feel are most important to solve with respect to the integration of water. And the performance measures that Zach discussed are the ways in which we would measure progress towards these different objectives. And we've just barely begun talking with the stakeholders about how to actually solve the problems. So, as Zach was saying, what are the different options that we have on the table? Options that are taken from individual master plans, for example, ideas from the stakeholders themselves will formulate these into alternatives. that can be discussed now in the context of a consensus-based group of objectives that the stakeholders have developed. So we've focused the first half of the project on identifying the most important problems to try to solve, and the second half of the project on identifying how to solve those problems. And that process, facilitated the way it is very methodical and defensible, and ultimately will lead to a group of recommendations that this group of stakeholders will pass on to you as the board to make decisions on.
I don't know if anybody has any specific questions on those two pieces of information we shared. Yes, ma'am.
Just one question that says the change in the 100-year flood elevation is identified as a qualitative aspect. It would seem to me that would be quantitative too, but how did you come to that conclusion?
Ultimately, it will be a very quantitative type of thing, especially with the attention that's being put on it now. In this first phase of the project, because there are so many different alternatives, 50, 80, 90, 100 alternatives that we're looking at, to analyze the effect of every single one of those on the elevation of the 100-year flood would be beyond the scope of work. But we can do that qualitatively now and screen down those projects that are most likely to have a substantial impact on that 100-year flood elevation and distinguish those from projects that are likely to not have a significant impact. And it could be a positive or a negative impact as well, and we'll be able to differentiate those. And so by differentiating projects, in some cases on qualitative standards like that, we'll kind of screen down to those that are most likely to be effective. And then the second phase of the work, once you receive the recommendations on the most effective groups of projects, we'll do some more quantitative analysis and computer modeling on these things and define what the 100-year flood elevation might be.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Have you said in this answer that I didn't get, do you think the 100-year flood limits will be changed? Will all this be changed after last week?
That process, when FEMA comes in, and I don't know how much y'all have got into this, but FEMA will now, has real quantitative data, as you heard Eric state, that shows above 100-year floodplain what will happen. So they have some real data. You know, up to this point, everything that FEMA does primarily is through a modeling process. They take actual real flow data and then try to estimate what the, so based on my understandings and talking to some of our FEMA staff internally, I would definitely expect the LOMR process, the letter of map revision process through FEMA to be adjusted based on this latest storm, and that would be for all the surrounding.
So we'll probably all be in the 100-year flood.
I don't know if I would say that, but I would definitely think it would be changed.
One thing to understand is that the rainfall event that we did receive was beyond the 100-year rainfall event. So the flooding that did occur, we can expect that it would go beyond the 100-year floodplain. So people who believe themselves to be out of the 100-year floodplain prior to this event may still very well be out of the 100-year floodplain. It's just that the rainfall exceeded the 100-year event. So FEMA has the challenge if they go through this letter of map revision process to determine, between the event that did occur, that flood event, and what the previous 100-year floodplain maps were showing, what is the appropriate level that they should be at currently.
Yeah, it'll be adjusted in some fashion.
And these data provided by this previous storm or this recent storm is very helpful in quantifying that information.
And just to give you an example of how we would do this, one project option that's been talked about by the stakeholders is the removal of the dam by the water intake plant. And we can say, just by looking at that qualitatively, that would have an effect of most likely lowering the flood elevation upstream of the dam, perhaps not downstream, but lowering that upstream, and use that to differentiate from a project that wouldn't have any substantive effect on that. And then later, if that's determined to be a project that you do want to move forward, we'd quantify that. We'd simulate that with computer models and define, does it change it by 1 foot or by 6 inches, and so forth. So that's sort of how we go progressively through evaluating qualitatively what projects are likely to have the most impact, and then more quantitatively looking at them in later phases of the work.
Yeah, that's sort of one of the main things we talked through with the stakeholders that were at the technical meeting today, was that this is really, like Kirk said, an initial sort of look across the board to compare ones, to break it down into 2 or 3 alternative groups that seem to meet those objectives the best. And at that point, we'll look much more into the depth in comparing those 2 to 3 alternatives to figure out which ones. And once again, alternatives are groups of projects. They can be, 10, 15 different projects that meet those goals, that help meet the goals as set forth by the groups. And ultimately, like Kirk said, that all will get brought back up to y'all to review, et cetera, and make sure that everybody's in agreement with what the stakeholder and steering committees have formulated.
My question is that, maybe I missed it, is there a time frame? What kind of
Yeah, currently,
timeline do we
moving
have
forward, we're having another stakeholder workshop the first week of June to formulate those projects and define how to start grouping those together into alternative groups. Within the what will be the fourth workshop then, being in the August timeframe. In between there, we've also discussed having another public forum to once again come to the public, publicize that meeting and be able to get some feedback from the public group and give them a similar type concept of where the project is going and the status update at that point.
So did I hear August?
That's the last stakeholder meeting, and there'll be finalization after that, so probably in the September time range.
I assume that all of the meetings are public meetings, and there would be certain times whenever you would take comments. That would be in the comment workshop, is that right?
Right, the public forums are open discussions. The last one at that point, we were primarily providing feedback outwards onto the progress and the project as a whole. At that point, we had just had our first stakeholder meeting, so we're still trying to finalize the actual first objectives. The next one will be much more going through the work done to date and then obtaining feedback on specific ideas and questions, comments, very similar to what we're doing here from public on any questions they have or any thoughts on other ideas that we may have missed.
I'd just like to know when the other meetings are going to be held. I can't attend. It might be of interest to me even though they're not public. I mean, they're not appropriate for comment.
I think one point I'd like to make is, first of all, thanks for all the great work, and sitting there a whole afternoon in some of these workshops I thought would be hard, but it's really been pretty interesting for a guy that doesn't know a lot about water and wastewater, and I think y'all are doing a good job. And one of the main reasons I thought it was very important for y'all to come forward at this time was to make sure that everybody was on board as far as the board, and of course they're getting to see this for the first time, and I would encourage them, if there's something on these objectives or something there that doesn't ring well with you, I would appreciate it if you'd get with me so I can take it to the steering committee and work with it there. I think we all understand after the recent events how important an integrated plan is, not only for potable water, but also stormwater and wastewater as we go forward. So thanks a lot. I thought it might be important if you just kind of give a broad brushstroke of who the stakeholders are, because we've just kind of thrown it out there.
Yeah, that's a good comment. The stakeholder groups are made up of citizens here locally that either have representing different groups or citizens that have had an interest in this process. Environmental groups such as the Harpers River Watershed, the Cumberland River Compact, state agencies from TDEC to U.S., well, state and federal agencies such as multiple agencies with TDEC, USGS, Fish and Wildlife, TWRA, there's a couple of others as well, Agriculture, USDA, and then also it involves the other utilities that serve portions of the Franklin, City of Franklin, particularly from the water utility side. And then there are both, staff that are there obviously to answer questions, as well as the other steering committee members. We have a Vanderbilt University professor as well, who's an environmental professor, lives here in Franklin, that we wanted to bring in some people that had a technical specialty in this type of realm to be able to provide feedback as well. He's actually the one outside member on the steering committee as well to sort of help provide technical review and technical feedback on that process. I may have forgotten a couple, but I think that's broadly touches.
Utilities, regulators, citizens.
Any more questions, Mike?
A related question, we had that proposal about the Lowhead Dam removal and the grant tied to that. How does that coincide with the completion of the recommendations by the committee?
Well, that is something that is working through. I'd like to bring the consultant in to give us some feedback on that. They talked a little bit about the modeling that can happen. There are a number of other partners with that, so what we're working on is how that would work in terms of a potential, really agreement, not just a memorandum of understanding, but an agreement of how the parties would come together to make the proposed project work and use about $350,000 worth of grant money, and then also have us, through this process, understand the impact on the system, if you will, overall, the river and the water intake function and just the whole picture, which is what the integrated plan is all about. So that's something that we are working with the potential partners to really fully develop how it works and who does what, and then assess the impact through this process as well. We may sort of test drive that through the group and bring it to you for consideration.
So does the grant offer go past the September completion date for this process?
Yeah, it has a longer time frame. We'll probably talk about it before then, but it has a much longer time frame than that in terms of the project itself.
Okay.
And as I discussed, we have the actual model is set up and running. We were originally had one meeting last week, and then this one, the 11th. We canceled the meeting last week, obviously, due to the flood emergencies, but we'll be having another on that. And we've talked with Dr. Moore as well about, this was sort of to update you on this process, and we wanted to give you all an opportunity to review what's been done. I do think on the website, on the water management website, there is a lot of this information as well. If you ever have any questions, feel free to contact Mark or Dr. Moore. They'll be glad to get you in touch with us. But we can get to a point, if y'all are interested as well, that we can do sort of that same technical type thing and show you how the actual model ties together and how the river is a central piece, how each of these pieces feed into it, and how we go through that process of tying all those pieces of infrastructure and the different systems together. So that's what we did today, which was planned to be a 2-hour meeting and ended up being about a little over 3-hour meeting. So we were getting a lot of good feedback, a lot of good participation from all the people representing.
Well, you have a lot to work with right now.
Okay, thanks, you guys, appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 6, the Sustainability/Grant Coordinator 6-month progress report.
When we added the Sustainability Grant Coordinator position, we told you we'd track the impact and come back to you and show where we are. And so we've just passed the 6-month anniversary when Andrew Orr joined us as our Sustainability and Grant Coordinator, and so we wanted to give you a flavor of what he's been doing and the impact that it's had, both in terms of in our organization, in the community, but also in terms of the grant management and grant generation side of it. So,
and soon, Andrew's going to graduate from high school. As we look at him, it's about all we can think of.
I've got some volunteer hours that need to fulfill.
Andrew, despite a youthful appearance, Andrew brings a lot of experience and a lot of passion for what the sustainability is all about in the broadest sense, and then also just as being a resource and working with our departments and identifying and pursuing grant opportunities. So, Vernon, I don't know if you want to comment, or we turn it over to Andrew?
Well, I just shortly, because I do want to emphasize what you just finished with, is that Andrew is a resource. He's a resource to our residents in our community, the business partners that we have, and all our colleagues that are doing things to enhance the quality of life in our community and obtain grants. And having Andrew help everybody, or at least be the conduit to provide direction, I think you'll see in his presentation and equally in your handout that that's really the key. And I can't emphasize enough that Andrew, working with everybody, is moving Franklin forward as the vision that Alderman Moore shared with you all and the community a couple years ago to become a top 25 city in the country. And I believe that we're making headway, and with Andrew's help, we'll eventually get there. But I'll turn it over to Andrew, and again, just want to emphasize that it's a combination of our citizens as well as our employees that are making these accomplishments a reality.
Take it away, Andrew.
All right. Good afternoon. Like Eric said, when I accepted this position, it was understood that I had to show results, and I'd also have to articulate them in a public forum. So I feel like this is a little bit of an unusual circumstance for a city staff person, but I really appreciate the accountability and the expectations placed upon this position. My position title is the Sustainability and Grants Coordinator, so this presentation will cover sustainability and grants and the coordinator aspect of it in that order. And I do want to be clear that this position is not performed in a vacuum. Quite the opposite. It's very collaborative. I think the mayor likes to use the term breaking down silos. So everything's very interrelated. The Sustainable Community Action Plan was adopted last fall, and that's kind of the measuring stick. There's a commission that was created to implement the action plan. I'm happy to say that they meet regularly. Attendance has been good, and we've been able to push some initiatives forward. The subcommittees that were created also meet regularly. To date, several initiatives have been pushed forward, including the recycling that Becky and her staff have been working hard to get up and running by July. The Greenways and Open Space Master Plan that Aaron Reinders took the lead on, and that was brought to this board in January. The Live Green Partnership, which was a very collaborative effort. The regional bus service that TMA operates and maintains, and many other great initiatives that the Parks Department has taken on, and also the Streets Department with being able to divert about 20% of residential waste through composting, and that by virtue of the brown bag composting of yard debris. And we've also established a pretty good relationship with an organization called Giggly, and they provide tools and resources at a very, very low cost, and they've been very helpful. So we definitely have a full plate. I can't say once since I've started have I found myself wondering what I should do today, or asking if there's anything I can help out with, because there's plenty. Currently, I'm nearing completion on the local government operations inventory, and this establishes a baseline for electricity usage, natural gas and fuel consumption, looking at commuting patterns for city employees, and I can tell you so far that the wastewater treatment facility uses the bulk of our energy. So this report will document our operation expenditures and energy usage, and convert the energy usage into greenhouse gas emissions. And I know that's a little bit kind of a scary term, so we try and frame it in terms of energy usage, and that's what matters. Franklin's also participating in the historic EV project. Nashville, along with Chattanooga and Knoxville, and some of the smaller areas in between along the major interstate corridors are part of the project, and we're one of 5. The other 4 would be Portland and San Francisco and Seattle and Phoenix. So it's a very historic project, and it'll be interesting to see how everything works out. So Franklin's doing our part to make sure that we're ready to take on some of these car chargers when they're deployed later on this calendar year. We're making good progress on many initiatives, but several still kind of lay in waiting. As an endurance athlete, I kind of think of this as that sort of lifestyle where you put in a lot of training and a lot of prep, and then you have a race, but then you celebrate the race, and then you get back to the drawing board and you keep training, and you continue that. With these, I guess at the end of projects we can celebrate those, but it's really a process that we're going to continue, and kind of a new way of approaching things. And making this shift is not easy, and no one said that it would be. And we've had some roadblocks, and that comes along with the territory. when you are taking on something new and this big. And to help with this, we are intending to provide an annual update to the Community Action Plan later this year, kind of around the one-year anniversary of it being adopted. Grants is the other significant portion, one of the three. Grants, a lot of people know, they know what grants are, but they don't really know the details of how they work or the process. And I'll kind of briefly explain how I approach this. And I identify funding opportunities by making calls, talking to folks, getting on listservs, checking databases. So you look and see what grant programs are out there, what grants are available. And then I've got a running list of projects, and mostly in-house, but some other organizations in town that have projects that could potentially be funded by grants. And then, so you have your list of projects, and then you kind of keep tabs on what grant programs are coming out, and pretty soon you can start to develop a strategy going forward. Reporting is a significant job of grants. Right now, with the acceptance of federal dollars, it's important to you have to play by their rules and submit quarterly reports. They'll request information kind of at the drop of a hat, and we're always prepared to give them that information. With the stimulus funds, it was sprinkled across the department. Mark Hilty's administering some, Kevin Comstock in TOC is, Lisa Clayton in Parks, Amy Herron in Police. They're all point people for grants, and then I simply try and provide assistance to them, make sure they're complying with the federal regs, and help them out. Since I've started in 2009, the city has submitted 5 grants. And we've certainly identified some that we'd like to go for in the future. Of the 5, 2 of them we were unsuccessful. They're highly competitive. Only 1 applicant was selected for each of those opportunities. And as you can see, the funding opportunities, they vary widely in topic, and subject, and scope. Coordinating and outreach is very important, working with other organizations in town, working across department lines here in City Hall, and simply fielding calls from folks in the community and answering emails. That's also an important part of it. School teachers have emailed me about energy efficiency projects. Restaurants and businesses have called or emailed wondering how to start recycling. I actually had a children's author mail me a draft of a book he was putting together and wanted me to review it because of the environmental focus of the book. So people are really taking notice, and I think the city has done a good job of simply raising awareness to these issues and supporting it, not necessarily the city going out and being a very big progressive local government, but simply just supporting initiatives, raising awareness, and doing that in a very positive way. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and Franklin is a great town. We know that. We have the awards to prove it, but we felt like we could do some things smarter, we could do some things better. There's some areas we could improve, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I hope I am exceeding this board's expectations and doing the job that you guys fully expect. And I certainly can't say that all of our work is done, because it's not, but I feel like we're heading in the right direction. And it's been fun so far, and I look forward to continuing on.
Andrew, thank you. Any questions?
I don't believe you did that. My question is on the upcoming initiatives, the zoning ordinance audit. What is that going to entail?
Within the planning department, we've discussed looking through the zoning ordinance and kind of seeing where we could slide in some sustainability type elements and make some improvements that promote those types of initiatives. And that would occur later this summer, early fall.
Do you have any ideas? I mean, when you say put them in, what are you thinking of putting in?
Well, I'm not I'm not extremely familiar with the zoning ordinance at this point, so I don't want to comment on anything specific.
It's really big, and it's got 1,000 million details. I've got zillion. I can't remember.
I've been kind of scared to get too close to it.
One thing that I have thought about is, notwithstanding the flood that we've had, that we need to look at probably in our landscaping requirements, do something about more sustainable plantings and more, and we've done a lot of things with native plants, but still, I think we need to start being realistic about what we require in that area.
I'd love to talk further about that.
One other comment related to maybe how you may be impacting or following up on some of our census information, because that relate to grants and the ability to get grants based on our population. Is there any work or any focus from that standpoint with the census? Maybe that's every question.
Well, I mean, that will bring some opportunities
Right.
down the line, and that's the whole part of Andrew's role, is to be sort of trolling for what those opportunities might be, and then engaging
And getting those
the appropriate
counts.
department or departments into looking at that, and then pulling together the right information to try to respond to it and win grants in competitive situations, and if there are added wrinkles to things we're already participating in, like a CDBG or something like that, that we respond to those opportunities too.
And Lori Giroux in the Planning and Sustainability Department did assist with some of the census.
Census, great.
I got one quick comment, and that is that Andrew's the kind of guy, we've heard they walk the talk, well, he rides the talk. He rides his bike to work every day, but he passed over just a little bit. You know, the buzz around Tennessee is what is Franklin doing. They're calling Andrew to find out what we're doing on a lot of these things that we think we're on the leading edge of the wave. And on June the 8th, we have a group coming into town that where we'll get the opportunity to highlight some of the things we're doing. And former Chancellor of Tennessee, Joe Johnson, Dr. Joe Johnson, will be here. He's the head of this particular group that's coming. So they'll get to see firsthand.
Great.
Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, item number 7, consideration of proposed ordinance 2010-34 to be entitled an ordinance to create Title II, Chapter 4 of the City of Franklin Municipal Code relating to the creation of the Battlefield Preservation Commission. And, I brought this forward. There was an entity called the Mayor's Battlefield Task Force, which was very unstructured, to say the least. And I felt it was important that we develop more structure for this, and that we kind of outline the duties of this commission a little bit more explicitly than we have. We presented it to the task force. They reviewed it in agreement with it. I think it was very well accepted. In fact, they were pleased to kind of have more structure. We've worked with staff to go over this commission to make sure we had everything covered, and I think everybody signed off on it, so we're going to ask for approval of that. Okay, thank you. Item number 8, consideration of the First Amendment to the Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation Agreement OB.102-N, attachment number 1, COF contract 209-0047 for the McEwen Drive Phase 3 improvements for an increase in cost of $33,861 for the relocation of electric lines. Mr. Parker.
Well, you have a memo in your packet. If there's any questions concerning this, I'll be more than willing to answer them. This is something that we need to carry forward and approve where we can get this project underway as soon as possible.
So the main reason for this, the cost just went up?
Costs have gone up. This estimates are typically only good for 30, 60 days or so. And they've done a new estimate since we're trying to get everything wrapped up to go to construction.
And you expect that construction to be this summer?
We expect to advertise and start the construction this summer. If we can get this approved, I'm going to try to get this paid for where the cost won't go up anymore.
We'll write a check before the price
Write a check before it goes up again.
It's about a mile project, is that it?
the total project is, this particular aspect of it is only half of it, basically, because we're not undergrounding from Carruthers Parkway to the TVA easement.
And I just looked on the webpage. It said approximately 40% of the construction will be funded by the state.
Yes, ma'am.
So is that in what kind of funds? I mean,
It is a part of the funding that was granted to the city for the Nissan project.
okay.
So it is,
Continuation on that.
it's coming through TDOT, but it is state funds from some, I'm not real sure where the source is, but don't care as long as they give it to us. But it's coming through TDOT.
And I noticed that we had an agreement with the developer that their part of it would be undergrounded. I mean, you know, is there some background? How did we come to that agreement? In other words, what did we get? You know, contractors generally, you know.
I would have to go back and research to find out exactly what all that is, but that was an agreement that was,
Right.
I think it kind of took some of us by surprise.
Well, just maybe whenever we see it again, I'd like to hear
Okay.
what that was.
Anything else? Okay, item number 9, consideration of COF contract 2010-0047 with Mallet Valley Utility District for the Highgate Subdivision Road resurfacing project.
What this is, as you're well aware, the city did the sewer improvement, and we're basically ready to do the road repairs, or the street department is. Well, Mallory Valley needs to go in and do some water line repairs and upgrades. Actually, they're going to be replacing their plastic lines with ductile, I think. Where's Joe? He's busy. But what we're doing is setting up this agreement where we can get everything done at one time, so that's what this is all about.
Item number 10, consideration of proposed ordinance 2010-33, to be entitled an ordinance to rezone .46 acres from high residential R3 to residential variety RX for property located at 1439 Columbia Avenue.
What this is a request for a rezoning to allow attached dwellings. It is a rezoning from R3 to residential variety RX. This rezoning came to you with a unanimous unfavorable recommendation from the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission meeting. So, you know, basically, the Planning Commission did not uphold the rezoning request. We are looking at what is currently approved is 51 units. What they would like to construct is an additional 27, with 3 of those being low-income units.
Yeah.
By and large, the planning commission said that they were concerned about the additional traffic, 27 units, the additional runoff from stormwater, and any impact that the additional units would have on emergency equipment being able to access the development. And based upon, I think, those 3 and possibly 1 or 2 others that I don't remember, the planning commission recommended unanimously not to rezone this piece of property from 51 units to 77.
Did the overall footprint change?
I'm sorry?
Did the overall footprint change?
No, just to clarify.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Gary Vogren. I'm representing the applicant, Geno's Retreat Development. And just a correction, the increase is 26 units. And I just want to clarify a couple things. You had mentioned about the footprint changing. The footprint of the current approved site plan is not changing. The building massing is still the same. The parking pavement will all be the same. Stormwater will be the same. It's really just an increase of 26 units, but just to clarify, there's only 15 bedrooms that are going to be added. Just given the market conditions of the current product that's built and what they're looking for in the future was a mix of evenly distributed 1, 2s, and 3 bedrooms, which was the 51 unit count. They're going to 77 units, but it's only an increase of 15 bedrooms because they're not building more 3 bedrooms, it's all 1 and 2 bedrooms, which lessens the parking. The building square footages are smaller in terms of the unit sizes, which the market demand. So just keeping that in mind. But the overall concept or site plan is not changing. It is basically the same plan, just a restructuring of units and building will match the character and style that's currently out there now.
as Ms. Powers mentioned, we're just trying to amend this parcel into the concept plan. This additional half-acre parcel will only be 8 to 10 one-bedroom units on that parcel. The remaining 5 to 7 bedrooms will be on the currently existing Jones Retreat development site. There's minimal traffic impact in terms of Columbia, given the small amount of bedroom units. As you know, the back half of the development is currently built, so Adams is not impacted by that. They're going to build out, if so approved, to build out that in one phase, the remaining portion of the development along Columbia. The traffic improvements have been suggested by the traffic engineer, Carl Rothman, to add a striped left dedicated turn lane into the site. He had mentioned this should have been done the first time around with the current units. So it's not really because we're adding units that's justifying that. He thinks that should have been done the first time around, to add a dedicated left turn lane into the site at Battle Avenue. Stormwater, as you mentioned, is we're adding more stormwater elements to the site plan that was currently approved. We're adding more water cells, water quality swales, permeable pavers, both potentially the new adjacent parcel, if that so gets rezoned, but also potentially add permeable pavers to the existing pavement that is currently not there now.
And to keep in mind, and so not to confuse issues, this is just the rezoning request.
Right.
The concept plan would have to come forward with the regulatory plan. All of those would come forward at a different time were this rezoning to go through. At this time, we're just looking at the use. Does this board want attached units in that particular location? And do you want the additional units?
Talk a little bit more about the economic times. I mean, what does that mean? What are you telling me when you said that?
Well, I'm not sure I said economic times, or just the market
The
demand.
market, maybe the market demand.
It's more about the units and their square footage. What is currently built out is a larger square footage unit. Units have 1, 2s, or 3 bedrooms. Knowing that is not selling at this time, the 1-bedroom unit, 2-bedroom is more so in that market range. So they're adapting to that, basically, to come in and say, we don't want to build more to the same 3s and 2s bedrooms that we have currently approved.
That's not selling.
That's right. And have an opportunity to have more viable units to be for sale at a smaller square footage.
Gary, I came to a meeting, your neighborhood meeting, and I think you might have addressed this, but I've forgotten.
Okay.
Are these units owner-occupied or are they rented?
These are owner-occupied.
These will that be a restriction that they are owner-occupied?
Yes, the units we're proposing are 3 dedicated workforce units. Those will be deed restricted as well.
Well, I'm just talking about the extra 26 units.
Well, they're all deed restricted, all 77 of them.
Currently, some of these are not owner-occupied.
No. But is there a HOA now, or, I mean, who
Yes.
determines that?
Well, they're not to
They need to.
the build-out yet.
Yeah,
So
full
the
completion.
management company's still in
So
charge.
you all still determining that?
They could be built as, you would build them as owner-occupied units, but someone may not buy them or may buy them for an investment purpose.
Some of the concerns we heard from the neighborhood meeting was the number of cars that would be on this. There's 77 units at 1.5 cars. That generates 115 cars. And I think some of the comments from occupants now say that some of the parking spaces are not realistic because you can't physically get into the access for some of those because they're near a wall, you can't make a turn and so forth. The neighboring residents are concerned about the additional traffic, both on Adams and Columbia, that this will generate. They're also concerned about fire equipment access. Currently, this is supposed to be a one-way, but
True, it
I
is
think
designed for one-way.
many of the occupants that live there now didn't understand that at the neighborhood meeting. Have we had feedback from the fire department about access with this new design?
It's been more of a conceptual plan, but we showed them a more detailed layout in terms of meeting fire code, turning movements, and showed how the parking spaces would be laid out. Everything that is currently approved and built is per the city standards in terms of parking depths and turn lanes and access. That is all designed per that standard.
Is there room for a retention pond?
Currently, it is not required, and the current plan was not required at that time because we were not improving or increasing the post runoff. There's a series of water quality cells on the site that were currently approved. As I mentioned, we're adding to that. Probably the largest of the cells is the one along Columbia, or Adams, I'm sorry, which may have to be expanded, but that's something that will be looked at when we get to a further detail.
And all of those would be in the concept plan, and they've already started working on the concept plan.
It's tracking
talking about
parallel.
how to deal with the stormwater issues.
I understand the Planning Commission's thoughts on this, I really do, and I'm not one to encourage additional units. But in this case, from what I understood at that meeting that I attended with the neighbors, that if this were to go into foreclosure and the bank took it over, you know, the bank is not going to be as sensitive to the neighbors as the people who own this property right now and own units. And I would be very much afraid of what would happen if that happened. So I'm going to support this, this addition.
The bank would still have to come before us with the same request for additional units.
Well,
Mayor?
yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm not inclined to zone things or rezone things under threat of foreclosure. I do have a question. Is the proposal 26 net new units?
Yes.
Over the entire project, not just this one little
Yes.
parcel.
What was approved, the last time that this project was approved, was 51 units. They're asking for an additional 26.
So instead of 2 and 3 bedroom, you're talking about
1 and 2.
ones and twos.
Yeah.
That to me must clearly result in an increase in cars. I mean, I guess you could say that 3-bedroom units don't necessarily beget the same number of vehicles because you might have some kids living there. But if it's a 1-bedroom, it's a driver or 2. That's just doing the math, adding 26 units to what was approved as 50-something?
51.
51.
51 is is a 50% increase on the same relatively small lot. That's significant. And I don't understand, it surprises me that the proponent, if I understood correctly, are we being told that this rezoning can be accomplished without adding to the parking area? Because if that's true, then it sounds like it was probably over-parked to begin with.
The rezoning is just a use rezoning. All of those issues are taken care of at a different time. And that is not to say, even if this property was rezoned, it's not to say at concept or regulatory that they would be able to meet our standards or our requirements. It's just to say that this is being rezoned from an R3 to an RX to allow attached. And so
I understand the
we're really
procedure.
not looking at
I understand the
those elements
procedure,
at this
but I've
point.
been on this board long enough to know what happens when you start adding cars without adding land, and when you start adding parking without adding land. We wind up with people coming in and asking for no parking signs in and around the neighboring area, because neighbors start parking on, because people that live there or visit there start parking on, hypothetically, Adams or other nearby roads, and we have it happen all the time. So, given the tight parameters of the project, I would be interested to know, hypothetically, if we permitted 26 additional units, would that require additional parking on the site? And if so, can it be done? Because if not, we're having a hypothetical, an academic conversation.
Yes, in additional units, there would have to be additional parking to support those
Unless it was
units.
overparked to begin with, which I don't remember.
Which I don't believe it probably was.
It was overparked from the beginning when it was approved. I can't remember the number, but it was. In terms of the additional parking, obviously it helps to have 1 and 2 bedrooms as opposed to more 3 bedrooms, just parking demands, based on number of parking spaces per bedroom is the calculation.
Well, that may be the code application,
yeah.
but
I
the
agree with-
reality
I agree
is
with you.
that you don't put kids in one, everybody that lives in a one-bedroom is a driver.
True. So we're meeting the standards in terms of the parking requirements. We're not changing the asphalt in terms of what has been built out there. It's a matter of restriping and adding spaces. So we're not building more spaces. It's just a matter of reconfiguring the current layout of the design. Granted, on the smaller parcel, we will have to add parking to that parcel in addition to the new building if we get that far. So there will be additional parking on that parcel alone. But internally, within General's Retreat, it'd just be a matter of restriping and keeping the existing pavement as it is.
So there would not, as far as you can tell, be a net increase in asphalt
No,
anywhere?
just on the new parcel.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah, on this half-acre parcel, yes.
Okay, so we add 50% units, and we add 18 bedrooms across 77 units.
Yeah, 15 bedrooms, 15 over 77 units. Yeah, that's right.
And are all of the units now deed restricted to owner occupant?
No, they're not.
No.
And you're suggesting that the new ones would be?
The 3 deed-restricted workforce housing units.
Oh, so you don't plan to make any of the,
Let's
not,
clarify that? Yeah.
okay.
Make sure that's understood.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
it could be all rental. It could be absentee owner.
Could be on, yeah.
Okay.
Not sure.
First of all, I don't see on here the density for this, but as I recall, this was one of the highest densities in the city at its original approval. Adding 50% more is, I think, a great concern. I have to say, I was not notified that the neighborhood was having a meeting. There was some glitch again, and so I was unable to attend. But I've had contact with some people who told me about some things that occurred. But as I say, it was among the densest developments that we have in the entire city before they were talking about increasing the density by 50%.
What, I didn't go to, can anybody give a consensus of the homeowners, that were there?
Well, there were neighbors too, I understand. It wasn't just the homeowners.
I know the neighbors, but what?
No, but I mean the homeowner.
But the homeowners themselves, who've bought into this area and have got to be concerned about their back, and I just don't know how they.
The homeowners that bought units and lived there weren't many of them.
Oh, so active.
And they were, the ones that spoke were not terribly excited about this because they said that's not what they bought into. But,
Well, I think that's, because while you do have to consider the neighbors, I think the homeowners did buy into a concept, and I think that does make some kind of difference as to how we approach that. And
Gary, do you have anything else to say about what the homeowners, the live-in homeowners?
Yeah, it's a small percentage of people who actually own the units.
That live there.
Also, those units are owned by the developers themselves, so they're part of that mix as well.
How many units are occupied out there right now?
They're all occupied.
Oh, they are?
I
Okay.
meant to, I thought you were thinking about who owns it.
So,
Yeah, they're all,
and how many are built?
27 units
Okay,
are currently constructed.
So you got basically 50% of them
Just about.
are currently constructed, they're all occupied.
Right.
How many of them are not, how many of them does the developer own?
A 4?
12, 15.
Okay.
How many are owner occupied?
5 or 6. I think.
Probably what?
6 or 7,
No,
maybe?
not that many.
So this is
From what
an
I've heard.
investment.
9?
9.
Occupied by the owner of the property?
No.
Occupied.
No,
by the
occupied.
guy that owns
Live-
the
They live
property,
there,
the
they
unit
own
lives
it and live in it.
1 in 3 is owner occupied.
Right.
Half are developer owned, and the other half are owned by landlords.
Yeah.
No.
Well, 1 in 9 and 15, and then the rest are owned by somebody besides the developer who rents them.
So it's already an apartment. It's already a rental.
Did I do that wrong?
9 are owned by owners.
Live in Palmer.
Not
Only
occupied.
4 of those, I think 9, actually live on the property. The remaining 5 owners have elected to rent their homes out.
See,
Okay.
so there are 4
The 4 of them are owner
are
occupied.
occupied. See, that's what I thought.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes,
But
Michael?
one more point. One of the changes in this would be part of the building that's not built yet, that would be a 3-story building that would only be 5 feet away from the property line from adjacent properties. So I'm concerned about the transition into neighboring properties if this proposal goes forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Item number 10, consideration proposed ordinance,
No.
8, 9, 10, that's right.
Okay.
No, item number 11, that was 10. I'm sorry. Item number 11, thank you. Consideration of proposed ordinance 2010-20 be entitled an ordinance to rezone 20.001 acres to be included within the Scientific Research Overlay, SRO zoning district for property located at the northeast corner of Mack Hatcher Parkway and Franklin Road.
This is unfavorable also.
Yes, this was an unfavorable at a 5-1 out of the Planning Commission meeting. As you may be aware, this particular scientific overlay zone was recommended by the city and was a city
Recommendation.
recommendation, yes. And we now have the first plan unit development coming into this particular overlay zone. Its entitlement are 200,000 square feet with 3-story max. There are permitted uses in the scientific overlay zone that include hospitals, rehab centers, research labs, and open space and accessory uses. However, Mr. Eccles is asking that we include some additional uses into this overlay zone, including clinic and educational facilities. Those uses were talked about when this came before you before, and at that time, they were not well received. Mr. Eccles is here. He may wish to speak to this issue as we go forward. There's a couple of things that can be done. Primarily, some of these additional uses can be better defined, or we can stick with the uses as they currently appear in the scientific overlay zone.
Well, you know, a hospital is allowed, so I would certainly think a clinic would be easily, could be incorporated in there. I think that was the sense of the scientific overlay, I
What
believe.
was the objection to it?
I was not at the planning commission meeting, that was on my own
Well,
choice, but
the objection to the 5 is that the overlay zone restricted
the uses.
the use of the property
Right.
to the point where it's very possible that you would not get the scientific hospital research building that you were looking for in that particular location. So that was why it was voted 5-1 to unfavorably recommend the rezoning.
So just so everybody understands, the recommendation of the planning department is to further restrict the current zoning.
That's correct.
And at the request of the board mayor alderman, we asked them to go back and look at that, and off of a motion that Dana made
That's right.
originally, and approved I don't know exactly, but.
That was a year ago.
That was.
That's right.
Last summer, this came to you, and you weren't comfortable with how broad that zoning was, and the overlay was a method to try to narrow that.
Because the existing zoning that we were being asked to use, and that exists today, permits of countless things that we
That's
would
right.
all have a cardiac arrest.
And it does, the existing zoning allows office and allows a number of
hoping that by now, this thing would have, there'd be,
Material.
I wouldn't be zoning it in the air anymore.
Now, if I remember correctly, what was, there was a square footage limit, if I remember correctly. What was that?
200,000.
200,000 square feet.
That's what we put in there?
That is what we put in
Okay,
there.
all right. I thought it was smaller than that.
Yeah,
So
that was
in
discussion of
essence,
smaller.
what happened is the planning commission, and a vote 5-1, and Clyde is the one that voted 1, recommended that we didn't further restrict it. So, just so you know that, I mean, so everybody
Now,
understands
what do you mean by further restrict?
to go to the sign, because right now it's just zone.
Right, all right, to put the overlay.
Yeah, to place the overlay in. So-
Right now, it's zone CI, and
right.
that has more uses than
That
this overlay zone
includes
would
like
have.
funeral home.
Yes, you could have a funeral.
And there's a long list. We went
Schools,
through-
churches.
We went through a long list of things that
That's right.
the board quite unanimously agreed were a bad possibility.
Correct.
And it was for that reason that we sent staff off and said, we'll go, because the applicant, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Eccles, he's here, he can refresh my recollection. Let Mr. Eccles, if I may, let me see if I remember this right. We had a hypothetical applicant who wanted to know that it was all in the paper, so I'm not going to say anything that wasn't. There was an applicant there was a potential use that somebody had to go first, either an announcement or a purchase or a transaction or a zoning. And we went first. And we zoned it something as, in my book, and I'm going to be very candid and frank about this, because I don't know how to be anything else. We zoned it something, we took a leap of faith, and we zoned it something because the McClendon doctrine says that it should be zoned bean field, because that's what it is and has been. But we changed it from what it was to something that would permit an applicant, a hypothetical applicant, to get serious about looking at it. And we zoned it that way to demonstrate the city's interest and willingness to facilitate that kind of result a year ago. But we knew when we did that zoning was way too broad and allowed way too many undesirable results for that location. I've got nothing against funeral homes or schools or anything like that. But I'm concerned about what is, as we've talked about, Mr. Eccles, one of the best pieces of property left in the city, the county. I mean, it's one of the most desirable, high-profile entry, gateway. It's got every buzzword associated with it you can say. We want to get it right. And so we zoned it, we took the step of zoning it without an applicant, officially, to something that would permit what we understood people were interested in trying to cultivate a year ago. Unfortunately, that's kind of the last thing that happened. We asked staff at the time to go put a little finer point on the zoning category so that we would get what we were hoping to get, and more importantly, in my book, eliminate the things as unintended consequences, possibilities. Is that about what happened?
I don't disagree with anything you said,
Except-
nor do I disagree with the intent of what you were trying to accomplish. There were two ways that the board was trying to protect itself from unintended consequences, as you put them. One was you put this 200,000 square foot cap, which is an arbitrary cap designed, I believe, on the record as a requirement that we came back in with a revised concept plan.
But also 950,000 square feet was a very arbitrary cap also.
It was a very arbitrary. That's exactly, and I said as much at the time, and I said we would never do that. So I agree with you entirely.
Okay.
And it was 950,000, by the way, because the city has no standards for square
Right.
footage. So we can't ask for anything specific.
In fairness to Ms. Nichols, the 950,000 was an arithmetic result, not a request.
It was, actually, the arithmetic result was $1.5 million.
Right.
And I said I would never ask for 7 figures.
Right.
So I just
Okay.
nailed it.
All right.
But that was one of the ways the city was protecting itself. The other way the city was protecting itself was what you said, was asking staff to put a finer point with the scientific overlay for, that, although it applies to all scientific research, we all knew that it was
All one of them.
this particular parcel. And I embraced that at the time. I, in fact, on August 10th of last year, sent a memo, I think I copied you on it.
I think I
certainly
have
sent it
it.
to staff, and went through the ordinance and recommended a scientific overlay that would accomplish these things, but accomplish what I also heard were the concerns of the board. So I leaned forward, as they used to say in the Air Force, and tried to provide information on that. I had 2 separate meetings with staff after that where we discussed that. They basically either didn't like or ignored what I'd done, and they produced their draft of the scientific overlay that eventually wound up being an ordinance. I had problems with that. I expressed those very specifically. One of them that I finally got out of the Planning Commission was a requirement that you couldn't have anything that had a TDEC permit, which would not have allowed an X-ray machine. So those were the kinds of things I was fighting against at staff. I went to Planning Commission, made these same concerns when they were creating the overlay, and what you see in front of you in the zoning ordinance now is what resulted from that. I had specific problems with that then as applied to what I understood the board was trying to do, and I expressed those then, but that's what resulted. So my only choice at that point is to try not to get this overlay applied to this property in its current form. That's when I appeared at Planning Commission the other night and articulated, and I'd be happy to articulate those again, but basically, the good news is we have been working hard for the last 10 months, and we have had a number of discussions. I think you would, there's no reason why you would ever do this, but if you paid attention to applications for medical uses, you'd see that there is already a proton therapy application at the state level, not for here, it's for Knoxville, but it's some people we're talking to. There is a whole nother bulk of work. We've got interested tenants who are exactly the kind of tenants that we talked about, that we're interested in the scientific medical research venue, that are interested in coming here. They're excited about the aggregate of uses that would all be that way. But these things do take time. I don't have to tell you what the environment's like. And so we are working steadily on that. And one of the biggest challenges, quite frankly, is trying to come up with a facility design that meets the concerns of the cities with respect, well, the city and the neighbors with respect to massing.
Have you figured out how to make an invisible building?
We're working on it. No, we haven't. That's part of this research project, yeah. But no, we haven't got that. But we are trying to make one that is virtually invisible to the people who are concerned about it. In other words, it maintains those sight lines for Roper's Knob that you heard the neighbors talk about, for example. So yeah, those are exactly the challenges. Come up with the architectural style that works for the most important piece of land in Franklin. Do you want it historical? No. Do you want it modern? No. I mean, I've had a number of conversations, and I've yet to have anybody tell me what they want it to look like.
Brick.
And so that's difficult, and that's what we've been working toward. And a lot of that has to do with square footage. You got to get enough square footage on the site to make it economically feasible, but not so it doesn't violate these things. So there has been enormous, I'm a duck working hard under the water, but you can't see much on the surface. So that's what's going on. My concerns with the ordinance as it's drafted are that the permitted uses are hospitals, rehabilitation centers, an undefined term of research laboratories, and then an absolute prohibition on other uses. That's not the same as other zoning categories.
I'm just reading that. It also says essential services.
Oh, essential services.
Passive parks and open space and accessory uses as defined by section 4.1.
Right.
And I mean, so what specifically do you think needs to be included? I listened to the meeting, the meeting the other night, and
well, clinics is
one but I mean,
I would like to see included.
Well, I don't see a problem with it. I mean, if a hospital is allowed, then I don't know the, I don't know the I mean, I don't know
Well,
the
problem is that
definition.
If it's a clinic, and it says the development of uses other than those permitted, then that would prohibit a clinic.
So you need a comma clinic.
Yeah,
And
okay.
then,
What
then the other
else?
one is educational uses.
Well, now, what do you mean by educational
Well, if
uses
I
as
have the
a?
kind of things I'm going to have in there, I guarantee you there will be an educational element.
Medical
There will be a-
education.
Medical education.
Absolutely.
Okay. That could be, you
And
know,
those
that
are,
could be
and here's the
handled.
problem, when you talk about the accessory uses under 4.1, one of the things you can't have as an accessory use is a double primary use. So if I've got a hospital, which I don't, quite frankly, ever intend to have a hospital there, site doesn't support a hospital, but it does support a clinic. And when I say I had nothing to do with it, but the people
Go ahead.
who do.
We.
have-
Go ahead. Why don't we take that hospital and put in clinic?
Well, all these changes are fine, but I'm faced with asking you not to approve this overlay as it is written. And there are a number of changes that would be fine with me. And that's what I tried to do from the very beginning, is work cooperatively to come up with it.
So you'd like to see medical and scientific education?
Education would be another one. The other big question would be office. I think we've handled office adequately with the restriction to appurtenant uses. I mean, you've added language in your ordinance about that being.
Accessory to
The
the.
doctors and scientists
Primary to
have
the.
an office.
Absolutely.
And so maybe we're okay on that.
I would think so.
That would be nice not to have that totally excluded, given, this prohibited uses language gives me great concern. And remember, and this is where I'm not saying me, and this is where I'm talking about potential tenants, and they say, what's this zone for? And I say, well, here's the zone, and they look at this and say, well, I can't even have an office?
It does say you can have an office as an ancillary use.
But it's just not an office building that becomes a
right.
primary use.
Office is actually a use that's excluded here. I don't know, when you're reading it's okay.
I thought that, and I don't have the full ordinance here, but I do recall that we said office would be acceptable as an accessory use.
So we may be okay on that?
Yes.
But you don't want, what you don't want when you're trying to get potential tenants is a lot of question marks. You like to be clear as possible.
All right, but let me tell you, also what you don't want is what was presented to us, which was a bubble diagram, which it had nothing in it except truly two bubbles there. And so that is the reason that I believe that the request was made for an overlay.
And I don't have any problem with that. As I told you, I supported that from the very beginning. All I'm saying is I just wish the overlay was more carefully crafted.
So can that,
But, I mean, is there any reason why we can't?
Suggestions, can we pursue that? And that
That's
would
right, and get
meet your
this
needs?
done. I mean, because it's just been lying here
Absolutely.
since, when did we?
Because my discomfort is that, not any fault of yours, but a year later, we have not excluded the unintended
That's right.
consequences. And,
Now, you haven't excluded them because the concept plan excludes them.
well,
The concept plan that you approved does exclude
I know,
them.
but I don't want to find out how clever you are.
The concept plan is the bubble, though. Let me tell you, the concept plan is the bubble and the 200 square foot limitation, and that is basically the concept plan.
No, ma'am, there's a lot more things in there.
I mean-
There is.
Specifically, things that cannot be done in the concept plan. It cannot be used for a funeral home. It cannot be used for a school, which is one of the concerns.
But the
There are things in
concept
there,
plan
right?
expires, does it not?
No, the concept plan does not.
Or could it be withdrawn?
It could be denied by the city, but if you did that, then you would be back to the base zoning. So
I just-
it would be the worst thing you could do.
The in-between status is uncomfortable.
Yes, I understand.
It is.
The neither overlaid nor applicant, plan. It's the absence of one of those two things that
That's
causes
right.
me some
And
discomfort.
I
Can
can
we
only
not
say I
ask
agree.
you, staff,
Yes.
and Brian to try it one more time?
That would be my suggestion, is that we go back,
Yeah.
work with
Maybe.
Mr. Eccles and, come back with something that the
Let's-
applicant and this board can
Because
embrace.
notwithstanding the planning commission's vote, for which I have respect, I think the board still wants to see what you're going for here, but remains concerned about
Right.
getting it right.
I understand.
And I do want to say, the minutes of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, because that's where the request was made, really are more appropriate to follow along with this than the minutes of the Planning Commission.
Yeah.
That is absolutely what needs to be reviewed.
Okay, well, let's do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But let's get this up, let's not wait another 6 months.
No. We need to.
I mean, for this particular piece of property.
Right, I
Mr.
agree.
Nye.
I don't think Mr. Eccles is going to let us.
Good.
Well, and though he would be pushing even harder if he had a tenant, so.
He will be leaning forward.
He'd be
Or not.
falling on his head.
Or not, because he has
Item
more
number
leeway than this does.
12, acknowledge receipt of Interplanning Commission review of site plan and conditional use review for Mid-American Distributors for a temporary fireworks stand on 77.16 acres located on 1050 John Williams Road. This is our cursory sort of a pew.
Yeah, the next
Look
one,
at.
same.
And I
Same.
do want to announce that we are sending these plans out to the Plan Commission 4 or 5 days ahead of time so that they can get comments back to us and we can get back to the county.
Okay.
We will now have a brief window
We'll have a
of
very
comment
brief
prior
window,
to
but there
action.
is some opportunity.
10 minutes.
Something like that.
And the same.
Well, of course, firecracker.
Yeah.
You mean
Same
for
on
12 and 13, is that what you're talking
Same
about?
thing, yeah, right. Item number 14, agreement between the Franklin Chapter number 14 United Daughters of the Confederacy and the City of Franklin, Tennessee for the maintenance of the Franklin Square Monument. You want me to?
I'll start, you can jump
Okay.
into, obviously, the monument on the square is a landmark and a community icon. And we have had some dialogue in the last few months with the UDC about the care of that monument and how we handle that. It was originally erected in 1899 through private donations collected by the UDC at the time and from citizens of Franklin and Williamson County. There's a common interest in maintaining it and making sure it is taken care of over time. And this is an agreement we've drafted with them. Mayor Schroer and I met with UDC representatives, and our City Attorney Billingsley helped us draft something that I think captures the understanding between the groups that the UDC would continue to keep a watchful eye on that monument and provide advice about what they think would be appropriate to have done with it in terms of its care. And the city would have the sole discretion to go ahead and take on maintenance and cleaning in particular. And the specific with this is that we are prepared with city staff to do a cleaning of the monument. It was last cleaned in the mid-'80s. We've done a lot of research, looked at it, and both streets and parks have worked together on this, and basically a cleaning with very mild soap and water is what's appropriate, and we're ready to do that. The only cost would be to rent the appropriate lift for 2 to 3 days to get that work done. But we want to have this understanding in place, this agreement in place before we take that on. We've worked, I think, very cooperatively in looking at this and trying to come up with a way forward to be able to take that on and not have any concerns with interested parties. So, I don't know, Mayor. if
Well
there's other
said.
things
I have
to say.
nothing else to add.
But, okay, so we're saying they still own it, but we can clean it even if it's against their advice on maintenance.
But we don't have to.
We don't have to.
But we can do what we want to,
Correct.
even though it's not ours.
It doesn't really speak to who owns it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No
Let's
one
be
said
clear
who
on
owned
that.
it.
Well, I've been told many times there's a deed somewhere.
There is not a deed.
We haven't been able to produce that, but
There's
like
not
that
a deed,
sidewalk list.
and they, it is on
Be around
city
a while to
property.
understand that one.
So there's not been a deed, it's on city property, it was erected and paid for by them, but it was put on city property, so there's certainly some question about ownership at this moment. We didn't really want to get into that, because it's not really relevant. The purpose of this whole thing is, it is a important part of the city of Franklin, and they don't have the ability to financially to maintain it. We think we can do it without spending a lot of money, and we think it's the right thing to do.
Must
Are
be
there-
done.
Yeah.
Must be done.
Are there restrictions on what can be done on that particular site
No.
city owns?
who you ask.
Right, I mean, I want
Well,
to make sure.
there's
here.
no restrictions on what we can do on our side.
On our city property, because I think that need to be
In other words,
articulated.
Questions about streamers at some point in time.
So if I wanted to come and set up a little, who do I get approval from?
You have to ask the city.
Okay, not the daughters.
They have nothing to do with that land, period.
They
So-
own the statute.
So noted,
Nobody
okay?
really knows they own. They might have gifted it to the city,
Okay,
and they just don't know that either.
I just need to make sure that the city gives the permission for use of the
It's our property.
land.
It's the city's property.
Let the record reflect.
And you know, we changed the shape of it.
All right, let's move on. Yes, we're going to clean it. We're going to clean it.
And they're gonna hopefully.
As long as they sign this agreement. then-
They've already signed it.
I signed it.
Okay.
I signed it.
All right, item number 15, resolution to approve the McCatcher widening contract with TDOT.
We've already
We've done
approved
it
it,
once.
right?
We
That's
just
just like
approved
you
this.
just
The
need to-
last sentence under the background is the main thing. They will not accept this for processing until they get a certified copy of the resolution.
Okay, so, no
Item number 16, consideration of bid award to Bob Ladd and Associates in amount of $12,569.86 for one new self-propelled athletic field drag to be used by the Parks Department for grooming the skinned areas of baseball and softball fields.
No questions.
No, you
Things
couldn't
are
put
shaping up.
anything else in that
Nice job.
ordinance. Item number 17, change order Liberty Park Phase 3 final project and final change order.
You have before you the memo of the final change order. The final change order ended up being $6,609. We did have a less retainage of $5,000. And we're just asking that we're closing this project out. We finished all the punch lists, and this is where we are.
All right, we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock.